Count me in for the ride. But I like a wild journey.
What's up, everybody? Here's the new tutorial. So it's been a while, but I'm going to record this thing and talk about this cool netting webbing effect that I've been playing with on all the recent posts. So let's dive right in. I'll remake this from scratch. Fresh scene, nothing's going on here. Got X particles, build 884. I'm going to start off with a cube, bring it down to 50 by 50 by 50. Press O to center it if you want. Alright, what we're going to do here is we're going to start with the simplest object. The cube actually yields a great result with this effect, but you can do it from any type of object. But I started with a cube and decided to emit from object from the cube. I mean, I tested a whole bunch of stuff first, but I ended up with these settings. And you can try it whatever you'd like, but I'm just going to show you the effect here. So emit from edges from the cube, everything else default. Emission, shot for now, we can do a pulse later. We're going to emit 1,000 particles, that's fine. Let's see what that looks like. So it's emitting a whole bunch of particles from the edge of this cube. Let's change dots to circles so we can see it better. And let's make this 180 frames so we can see what happens a bit longer. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is add a constraints tag. Dynamics, constraints, XP constraints. And right here we're going to go from birth to the distance tab and connect within distance. So what happens is all the points that are emitted from the edge of this object have to adhere to these set of parameters. So within distance, the weight value is like how much this effect affects the particles. So 100% affects the particles maximum, and minimum, obviously, it makes sense. So connection limit is how many particles each particle can connect to. 40 centimeters is the radius that it looks for, so each particle will look in 40 centimeters worth of radius to try and connect to the next point. And then stiffness is how stiff the connection is, stretchiness. This is what's going to be very cool to play with. And then breaking point, I'll explain, is this threshold by which points will snap after they've connected. So if 2 points are connected and the breaking value here is 0, they won't break. If they haven't connected, then they'll fly off. But if they've already connected, they won't break. Then I'll show you how I figured out that at a 50% value here, it really does something random, where you start to really not have any control over it and it breaks everything. So there's a weird way of interpreting this, at least for me. So I ultimately fiddled with it and got it up to this 500 value, which you can pump in, just type in, and this actually affects, it kind of creates a threshold where some break and some stick. So a lot of preamble for, let's see what this effect does. So there we go. First step is now we're seeing that the particles emitted from the edge of the cube are actually connected. And they're kind of wobbling here because, one, the cube doesn't have a collider on it, and the other reason is that there's no gravity to affect these particles, so they're just bouncing back and forth trying to maintain this constraints tag. Nothing else is going on. Okay, let's do something here and add a collider tag on the cube. Add this collider tag and you'll see immediately something happens. When they bounce back, they don't intersect, but they bounce off and fall. So if we take off the bounce, take off the friction, that really doesn't affect this effect so much, but it just resets everything to scratch because we don't need it yet. All right, so the little magic here is this connect on collision. So by default, there we go. The magic immediately appears where it does this very cool kind of bounce off because it's trying to emit at the speed that we set here, 150. Let's do 0, and you'll see it doesn't, it just emits right there. If you do 500, it's really bouncy, but it ultimately springs back. So nice kind of 160, this will give us that pulsation. All right, let me reduce this actually before we make it long so it kind of loops a bunch of times. Actually, what I meant to do is, yeah, let me do this first, and then I'll do the pulse. So here we got our first few sets. It's such a simple thing, but you really need to connect all these. So if we reduce the stiffness, you'll see that it gets a little bit loosey over here. It takes a little bit longer to come back. If we add this break, like I said, just 1%, watch what happens. It doesn't stay, just a couple of these stick over here. If we do 50, now I think I'm learning like 50% of the ones that are over here are sticking. If we do 100, it gets a little bit more. So I realize like you can pump this to like, say 600 and it will maintain some of this and some of them will snap. So this is a very cool value to mess with. Not apparent, but initially the non-breakage, the 0% over here is actually the most fun to start with. Get the stiffness. If you stiffen it up completely, you'll get like taut ropes. If you loosen it up completely, you'll get exploding ropes. Just one stiffness does this really cool stretchy effect. So lots of different combinations. So I like 70% here. It gives us kind of ropey quality. Connection limit, same thing. Let's see, 2 connections. Little bit. Like strands. 3. Bring it up to 6 and it starts connecting. The more you pump this, the more your processing speed will take over, but you can get even nicer results. So this is the premise of the effect. Let's add some more things to it and make it fun. So reset this to default. Another thing, let's add some segments to the cube. So if you add segments, you get the more points here. It's not bouncing off as much because these are more in the corner and getting that kind of rebound effect from the object, but you could say bounce and add that. And you could change the stiffness here a little bit. And you could also blast this emission speed to 300. And now we can get a bit more movement. In fact, it's more about this connect collision thing. All right, so let's talk about that. So the same way we had constraints tab and all the values here, we have the connect on collision section that needs to be toyed with to get it exactly right. So one connection is good for running a fast sim, but you can start adding more connections here. And you'll see what happens. It basically starts to look for closer connections, I think, and add ones that it didn't find before. It's not so different here. I would imagine if you had more points, it would start doing different things. So let's add like 5,000 points here. Yeah. So this is really interesting. And I haven't gotten that deep on this shape yet, but I wanted to keep the sim in a pulse and keep it fast, so I was using these types of values. Let's bring this down a bit more. And let's say we wanted to try and get this to move a bit. So let's change this to 2 as well and see what happens. All right, the more vertices it has, the more edges it has to fill up, the more processor it's going to take up. Oh, I know how we can move this. So, right. So now let's introduce gravity, because gravity is pretty fun. And it can control the particles that are sticking too quickly and start making them move in interesting ways. So let's add a gravity modifier right here and just press play. This is where you start getting the hanging ropes. But I meant to do this step before, but let's do it here. Let's generate some trails, add the emitter in here. Let's hit save and immediately take a look. Look at that. That's kind of cool. I haven't even played with this effect, but what we're really looking for is changing the particle trail to constraints algorithm and then distance. So it basically mirrors this constraints distance. Now let's press play, and you'll see we've got ropes connecting all the particles. So here is where we could probably just honestly even hide the emitter and just let the trails exist. And you'll see, so the kind of meshing comes together over here. Depends on your renderer, but you can use a hair tag. I use the Octane object tag and render as hair. Usually somewhere around 0.5, 0.2 to 1. But let's keep playing with it. So now we have the trail that shows exactly what's happening with the ropes. You'll see that they're slightly offset from the cube, and I'll show you how we can fix that really easily. So just duplicate the cube, get rid of the collider, and we'll make this cube visible. And this is cube collider. We'll hide the cube collider, and then we'll increase the size of the cube visible. Old school trick, and that will look like it's actually touching. There must be another way to do it, but I feel like having the calculations have to deal with it would make it much slower. So this trick pretty much works with every object. Just hide the one that you're using the collider with and replace it with the high definition one that you want it to look like it's emitting from. So let's hit save, and let's get back to what we want to do with gravity. So default gravity, depending on the settings of this constraints and the breakage of this connect on collision. So let's play with this for a second. So break on collision, 1%, you get this kind of cool thing where most of it starts to break down. If we do what I did before, so 500, a little bit starts to break. This is like the coolest effect I've found yet, because it waits a little bit and then starts dripping some more. And you can just like 550, change it even more. And this is where we can make it a bit longer. Yeah. Man, this effect is rad. I haven't even rendered anything with this yet, so I'm sharing it directly with y'all in this tutorial. But I'm actually going to save this and increment, because that's cool. All right, let's do something. Let's add maybe more connection limit. And I haven't even added the pulse. This is a single shot, so it's running pretty smoothly. You can do whatever you want here. You can put the trails in a spline mesh, but you can also add this tag and render as hair. It looks fairly the same ultimately, and actually renders much faster. Spline mesher is pretty slow, but you could also, I mean, if you wanted to, it doesn't look great, but mostly because you need to increase the settings by a lot. But you can essentially throw the trails in a VDB mesher and tighten this up a bit. You can smooth it. And you can get kind of cool like gelatinous blobs along this. Again, I haven't done it because it takes a long time to render. It's much slower, especially when you're doing the pulse animation, but this could make it look really cool. And they're stuck together, and the more points you have, the smoother the lines. So this is the basics of this. Let's play some more with some settings in terms of the gravity. So let's do gravity 0, see what happens. All right, so this is where you can maybe blast the emission settings to like 200 and get the kind of cool spread out net. When it comes back, it lands in this very cool way. You can go really as much as you want. Look at that. Let's bring that down to like 500. Okay, what else can we do? Let's reduce that back to 150, default. let's change the particle radius and see what happens here. I think it's just going to take longer to calculate. Let's do 1. Yeah, it basically makes the distance between each particle on the rope less and less and less, and makes it a lot more, I guess, gives it a lot more curves. So let's see what's going on here for a moment on the collider. Is it actually getting tighter on the collider? Maybe this is what I was looking for. Maybe it's because it was 3. Might have solved it here. Yeah, that's what it was. All right, so if we do 1, yeah, that's pretty sweet. All right, solving things in a tutorial. What if we did 0.2? It'd be even closer. Yeah, so this is interesting. I mean, let's see what happens if we actually try and push the value here. 5,000 and a subframe step. Ooh, that's insane. Yeah, so it's possible to get, you know, it's much slower right here. Let's actually just leave 1 subframe for now. All right, that's a lot of particles. Let's reduce the number of particles to 1,500. Yeah. So you can get much finer lines and better collisions using smaller particles. Should have been obvious to me, but I was kind of so distracted with all the other stuff that I didn't pay attention. But here, we solved it in the tutorial. Let's get this down to 500. Maybe it doesn't need that many points. There we go. So I kind of like this abstract mesh. You get a little bit more webbing over here in a way. And pump this a bit more. All right, so that's gravity at 0. We saw gravity pulling down. Let's do negative gravity and see what happens. Obviously, it's a mirror effect, but it's very interesting because it feels like it's like a parachute, or like a spider shooting a web up into almost like a parachute, like those little spiders in what is it, Charlotte's Web, where they all escape on their kind of netted parachute of silk. And I know that this is, in a way, it would be cool to kind of skin this and make this fabric-y, but there's probably a way to do it. So yeah, that's negative gravity. So you can animate the gravity to do different things. And I guess what we can do here is let's change the break so it doesn't break off. And let's use gravity to kind of pull it off the object. So now it's pulling. And then what do we have here? We have stiffness, less connection limit, and a little more loose. I think maybe I needed this actually. Yeah, let's do 700 so make it a bit stiffer. And reduce the gravity because it's pulling it too much. Actually, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there was no braking. I think it's maybe because, yeah, I know what I did. Increase the size of the points here. Let's put that back up to 1. See what's going on. All right, that pushes it off a little bit. Let's reset that to default. All right, connection limit 1. Reset this to default. And really just play with this value on, there we go. That's sort of the breakage that I wanted. So now let's set the pulse right here. What do we have? The pulse set to 30 interval. So it will be evenly divided, but of course you can change the interval. I've been using just an even one. So let's see how that looks. And now they'll start overlapping and doing this cool thing. what I should do, see immediately on the second one it gets very intense, so that's because we have segments. Let's change these, even though only one of them is a collider, back to one segment. And you'll see now it's a little easier. Let's also reduce the number of points because it gets heavy very quickly. Let's reduce the speed a little bit so it doesn't fly off too much. Reduce that a little bit more. There we go. And then the collision on the cube, no breakage. Alright, and there we'll start to get these kind of... I've also been animating the cube, but let's try and get this to stick without... Alright, so now it's bouncing off entirely. You see it gets stuck over here and starts pulling. If I bring back maybe one segment in the middle, yeah. So it is an effect that needs particular settings to work in different, in all these different ways. Like right now that it has this center point, even it has an anchor to hold some more of these and it doesn't just fly away. Let's bring it back to 1. You'll see it's just the exact shell outline. Add one more segment here, and then it emits from the center, and all of a sudden we have connects. The more you add, of course, the more connects you have. So the first, let's do 4. You'll see it starts getting like really wiry here. It's more of a messy effect if you add too many vertices, too many segments. So 2 is good though, because you allow it to have a hook. And then we can also rotate this cube, but first let's see. Okay, so now we have this. Let's reduce the number of points being emitted, so it's a bit easier on the calculations. And now if we play with the gravity, increase the gravity, you'll see we'll start to get this kind of ropey thing going on. Really interesting, right? Let's do regular gravity. And that's sort of like the posts I've been putting out recently. You could add a lot of gravity. Let's do 5,000. And let's have 1% breakage. Or let's 500% breakage. It starts to do something. Let's do 1,000 breakage here. And less stiffness. Is it like 200? Still trying to figure out this break point because you still want it to hold on. Maybe it's much higher. Yeah, there you go, like 8,000 breakage. Wow, that's cool. Figuring shit out live. Yeah, that's how we do. And reduce the gravity to back to normal. Let's see what happens. That's cool. Yeah, so you can actually fine-tune what you need to do, which is breaking when you need it and kind of falling off. Very versatile. Let's do one last thing here. All right, we're gonna get here and actually throw off some bits. Let's break this cube, select a few of the sides. We're also gonna rotate this cube, make it a little bit smaller. Also the scale does change things, so there we go, look at that. Wow, that's pretty damn cool. Let's add a collider onto this. Inside, because the normals are there. Whoops, that's taking a second. All right, we got sloppy ropes landing. We could even make this connect on collision, and it would look cool, but it would take a lot of processing. But that's the idea. Okay, what do we want to do? A little bit more. So gravity is at 800. That's fine. What we want to do is shoot out some ropes from this cube and have them stick to the walls. So now we have that. We have the cube, and we have the connect on collision. So we want to shoot out the particles. Let's see, a little bit more. But we also want them to break. Right now they're sticking. This is the other effect. All I did was increase the speed. No speed, let's see, no speed particles. This is just the gravity affecting it. Let's do 1000 speed. All right, here we get our crazy Spider-Man webbing effect. This is, I haven't even tried this setting yet, so a lot of these are me testing it for the first time, but now because all the the constraints doesn't have any breaking, so everything that's connected is staying connected. But let's do it if we have the 500 breakage and see what happens. There we go. That's cool. That is a total mess, but I don't think I've seen this effect before. And it almost it's like daddy long legs and splooge and like all sorts of paint splats. I think you could do a lot with this. So we also reduce the number of particles, so let's bring that back up a little bit. It'll be smoother. Look at that. All right, what we haven't done is, let's bring this down, bring this over a little bit. Let's put this in a null object, and let's just set a very basic 360 keyframe, put that at the end, put 0, keyframe that, linear, hit save, and let's see what happens now. Alright, so if it was messy before, now it's even crazier. And yeah, so this is the crazy webbing netting effect. And you can do a lot with this, right? You could add a vertex map. Let's do that since I'm taking it further. Let's so this cube is very simple. US, 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 US. Right, then select all of this, set vertex weight, hit OK, it creates a vertex map. So what's going to happen? The vertex map use fields. I don't even think you need freeze. You need to just go into here and hit XP particles fall off. Drag in our emitter, and all of a sudden you've got connection markings. So there we go. So you can do a lot with this vertex map, like spawn particles, for example. Let's do, you could do this actually really easily by, on this cube, you already have this. You can do, right, you have an XP collider tag. You can go to reaction, no, not reaction, to spawn. And basically on colliding with this object, we have enable, add a spawning emitter, go to the spawning emitter, and what did we want to do? Make it smaller points, reduce the speed so that it doesn't, actually, let's reduce the speed, and yeah. And so that's that, and then add spawning emitter on collision point, direction spherical, number to spawn. Let's leave 20 for now and take a look at what happens. So that's cool. So at every point you're getting like a bunch of particles. That's what I want to do, make these circles so you can see them a bit better. Let's make this a bit smaller, like 5. Yeah, so that's a right old mess of webbing and reactionary particles. You could use the vertex map for really anything you wanted. You could have more netting spawned. Yeah, so thanks for watching this. I don't probably need to do a render on this. You can render this any way you want with either spline mesher or hair render, and then particles as you would normally do it. All right, that'll wrap it up for today. Thanks so much for checking out the video, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you make a cool render, please tag me in it at levelbevel on Instagram. Catch y'all on the next one.